I'm Seth Godin. I'm a best-selling author coming to you from just outside of New York City. I'm the bald guy with tasteful but yellow glasses. And I'm here with my friend, Liz Jackson. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Seth, and hi, everyone. My name is Liz Jackson. I am a founding partner of the Disabled List, where we engage in disability as a creative practice. I am a queer white person. I'm wearing a green hat. I have big expressive eyes, and I'm prone to smiling, especially when Seth is talking.
So when we got the chance to do this, when I got the chance to do this, I said, first of all, what an opportunity to dance with my friend Liz. But the reason that this was an instant yes for me is because I have such respect and admiration for the people who are on this call, for showing up to care enough to do this work. That lots of people at fairly large organizations do the job they did yesterday, that their job is to maintain the status quo, that it is comfortable. But the people who are part of this conference are leaning into possibility. You are showing up to make things better by making better things, to bring dignity and respect and to be able to see what is possible. And it is not easy work, and it is important work. And Liz and I are here to talk about some of the key concepts that you might be dancing with, or to shine a light on the ones that you might not be noticing. Our goal in this short time is to have a conversation with each other and to make you think. Not because we have the answers, but maybe because we have some questions. And then we're going to get to our favorite part, which is your questions. And the two of us will engage with each other and with you about what's up. So what I've done is brought along some words to get us started. And I'm going to hand this over to Liz as we get to the first one. Over to you.
Okay, so the word is going to be popping up on the screen. And the first word is community. I was co-teaching a class with a friend about a week ago, and the class is on design and community. And it was maybe 3 or 4 classes into the semester. And I happened to we were going around the room, we were doing introductions, and I happened to encounter an exchange student. And I asked the exchange student, like, how do you feel about this class and the way that this class discusses community? And what she said to me is she went home after the first day of classes feeling a bit of shame, because she was sitting to the right of the teacher, which meant that she was going to be the one that was going to describe her relationship to community first. And what she did is she described her neighborhood, right? And then after her, as each person went and described their relationship to community, they were speaking about more politicized elements of their own lives. And so it was very much a surprise to this exchange student to see how politicized community has become. And I tell you this because there's a disconnect between the things that we are claiming to do and what those claims actually achieve. And it's important to start to understand and acknowledge these as institutional barriers, because it's preventing us from pushing things through that we're trying to do. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that disconnect.
And one of the things that we see is that words have a purpose, because they allow us to even have a conversation about something that ordinarily we wouldn't know how to talk about. And, they didn't invent the color orange until just a few hundred years ago. And before that, it was harder to even imagine that there was a color we call orange. So when we talk about words, and the next word on the screen is the word change, it gives us an anchor to begin having the conversation. So when I talk about change, what I am saying is, this is your job. That if there is no change happening, why did you come? That the purpose of any project is to make a change happen. And what we get the chance to do is decide what the change is before we begin. Why are you here? Why did you answer the phone? Why did that person walk over to the table? Why did we build this? Why did we do that? Because we're seeking to make a change happen. And organizations and brands and movements that matter because they're very clear about the change they seek to make. The next one, and we're zipping through these so we can do even more Q&A, is this word status, which Liz and I love to dance around a lot.
Yeah.
It's misunderstood by so many people. Over to you. You go first.
Yeah, I'm actually curious to kind of get your response to this after I kind of do my little spiel. So you might have noticed that when I was talking about my friend where I co-taught her class, right? I was thinking about this the other day. Like I say I co-taught this class, but I know at the end of the day, if someone asked my friend what she did that day, she would have said that she taught because it was her class. So I come from a family that has instilled in me a deep love of sports, and I took great interest a few years ago. There was a Supreme Court case. And in the Supreme Court case, it was between the NCAA and student athletes. And it was really interesting to me because in the 1950s, the NCAA created a special designation of athlete, i.e. student athletes, because they wanted to find a way to not pay them. And I just took a lot of interest in this because I was seeing how this thing that I now call hyphen status was also playing out in design. And the way that the NCAA intended it is, and this is the case with hyphen status, whatever falls after the hyphen, right? So student hyphen athlete, whatever falls after the hyphen is an expertise that is essentially uncompensated. And so when you think about this in the work that we're doing, especially if we're doing UX research or design, whatever that falls after the hyphen is systemically uncompensated. You might have a user expert, right? The expert is uncompensated. You might have a co-creator or a co-collaborator. And this is really important because we need to understand as we are approaching people to do this work with, what we're actually telling them when we're giving them special designated terms. And so that to me is what status means. It's how you sort of get relegated to another form of status when you lack an institutional affiliation, right? I got the hyphen status with my friend that I was co-teaching with, right? Because I wasn't part of that academic institution she was, or you're uncompensated.
It's brilliant. It truly is. And I hope it helps unlock things. For me, two things help me see status in everything around us. The first is a book by Keith Johnstone from the early 1960s about theater called Impro. And in it, he describes the fact that in every single useful piece of drama, whether it's a book, a play, a movie, every interaction, every scene is about status. Who is moving up? Who is moving down? Who is reasserting their connection? Who is being ignored? And the other part is my dog, Baxter. My dog, Baxter, gets along great with everybody, including Liz, but he hates Truman across the street. He hates Truman. And the reason he hates Truman is 5 years older than him, but Truman's also a German Shepherd. So on one hand, being a German Shepherd would make Truman a higher status dog, but being older makes him lower in terms of physical ability. And so they can't decide who has higher status, and you have this conflict. And when we talk about status, it helps explain so much about how humans, how organizations, how marketing works. That the reason someone buys an $80 handbag instead of a $20 handbag is not that an $80 one holds their stuff better. It's because it sends a message to themselves and to others about who they are. We make lots of decisions that are about tiny little gradations about who's up and who's down. And when you think about your work, unless you are the CEO, and even if you are the CEO, when you are talking to the boss, to the investor, to the board, they are thinking to themselves, how will this affect how I see my role in the world? And when we can recalibrate how we talk to the people we seek to serve, to elevate their status by not treating them as an other, but by treating them as the whole point, they will be much more likely to give us the benefit of the doubt because we gave them the benefit of the doubt. And a lot of what's going on now that's so long overdue in issues of disability or privilege or race or all the other things that we're busy finally having a conversation about is what's the default? What's the default of status? And how does shifting the default make everybody involved feel? Because the conversation isn't about what you think the conversation's about. The conversation is almost always about status. The next word, which goes right to this, is the word who. So I'll lead on this one and then I'll pitch it over to Liz. This work you're doing, this memo you're writing, this website you're designing, who is it for? Who really is it for? Because once we know who's it for, we can be really clear about what we're doing. So to pick an example that has nothing to do with this industry, that movie that you're directing, are you directing it to make critics happy? Or are you directing it to make a certain audience that buys tickets happy? Are you directing it to make it so that the person who buys movies for Netflix says yes? Or are you making it so that 20 years from now, you get the idea. Who exactly is this button on your website for? Who exactly are you speaking to when you're speaking in the meeting? And how will what you are doing affect their perception of status? Liz, you want to chime in?
Yeah, so I work at the disabled list with my thought partner, Alex Haggard. And it's actually on their Medium account that they posted this work that we have been doing. And it's called, if you look up Alex Haggard, the against list, it'll come up. And one of the things that we're encountering is that in design, in accessibility work, we oftentimes start a process by defining a problem. But for me, a lot of this comes down to a lot of the work that we need to be doing is actually analyzing our intentions before we even begin engaging in that design process, right? Like, why are we engaging in this way? And there's one particular question that has sort of been, I think, my sort of North Star these last few years. And what that question is who are you trying to impress with this work? And it's an important question because so I came up with this idea a few years ago, this term, and I call it a disability dongle. And essentially what a disability dongle is it's I call it a well-intended and elegant yet useless solution to a problem we never knew we always had. They are solutions that oftentimes derive in, sort of design programs and design schools. And if you're sort of into disability work at all, you've encountered the pushback on Twitter. And what happens is there will be an announcement of something like a stair climbing wheelchair, and wheelchair users will push back and say, like, we don't want this innovation that we can't afford. We want infrastructure. But when you actually start to look at the people that created that stair climbing wheelchair, what you realize is that their goal was never actually to impress the disabled people that this product was ostensibly intended for, right? Who they wanted to impress were the people that they wanted to inspire with their good deeds. And so how is it, if you're engaging in this ally work, how is it that you can start to figure out, how do I actually impress the disabled people that I am doing this work, with and on behalf of? Because I think it'll shift a lot of what gets pushed out in sort of these more innovative type ally spaces.
Exactly. And you can see now how status and who are dancing together along with this need that consumers have for convenience. Because as consumers, most of the time, we're not impressed when someone makes something more convenient. We're just drawn to it. And those are different sorts of feelings. Yeah. Okay, so here we go. This one is a favorite. So over to you.
Yeah. Actually, Seth, did you see the gender pay the gender pay gap bot that happened last week?
Yes.
So I was in love with this. This person created this bot, and what would happen? It was in the UK when an organization would tweet about International Women's Day, the bot would retweet it, and they would talk about the pay difference at that organization. So last year, I woke up on the morning of Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and I was like, I'm going to try something. And so what I did is anytime a corporation would tweet about GAD, I just would simply check, and there was an image, I would simply check the images to see if there was alt text. And I did this all day long. And by the end of the day, of the 20 corporate GAD tweets that contained an image, only 7 of them actually contained alt text. And one of those alt text descriptions was actually inaccurate. And so, what I want to make sure happens is that we're not making announcements that undermine the work that we're trying to do. Like those empty gestures make it harder for us to do the work that we're trying to do internally at a lot of these corporations. So because of the success of Gender Pay Gap Bot, Alex Haggard, our new friend Hannah Kolbeck, who is a lead engineer, and she created other accessibility related bots such as Alt Text Reminder and Alt Text Crew. So the three of us have created the A12Y bot, and you can follow it at A12Y, and it's going to simply do what the Gender Pay Gap Bot did during GAD, and it's just going to check the GAD tweets that have images for alt text.
So let's break this down into a little bit. So the word was accountability. And the thing about organizations like the one where you work is that authority is hard to come by. Authority is what managers have to have. Authority is the power to tell other people what to do. And they don't hand it out very easily. But leadership is not based on authority. Leadership is based on something else. And responsibility is easy to take. Responsibility is there for anybody who wants it. They give it away. And the thing that goes with responsibility is accountability. And so part of the A12Y idea is for organizations to do what they have traditionally done with a certain kind of consumer, which is a buck stops here mindset, which is to say, we are promising something, and in exchange for your money, you're going to get what we promise. So Coca-Cola is accountable for the fact that the thing tastes the same every morning when you drink it for breakfast. When they changed the formula for Coke, people freaked out because they had undone the thing they said they wanted to be responsible for. So what's on offer here is the ability for people who are not in charge, who do not necessarily have authority, to say, I want to be held accountable. I would like to be accountable for a certain set of promises to a certain who, because by doing that, I can sell my bosses on the fact that our status within the organization and our status in the marketplace will go up, which is why everyone's here in the first place. And when we think about alt text, and Liz really opened my eyes to this, alt text, first of all, is not just for people who are unable to see the image. It forces us to be accountable for why we picked the image in the first place. That being able to put words to the thing that we are showing people means we have to explain why we picked this picture instead of that picture. And that makes everything better. It makes it better because it brings us back to the intentionality that we started with. So I'm having a ball. We could do this all day. Here we go. The next one is the what.
So I just realized we forgot to actually say what A12Y means. And so I just want to make sure that.
Please, go ahead.
So we all know that there's 11 letters between A and Y in accessibility. There's actually 12 letters between A and Y in accountability. And so the point of this work is to kind of figure out how is it that we can incorporate A12Y into our A11Y.
Yes, bingo, exactly. Which leads to the what. So if we know the who, and we know that we're here to make change happen, the what is what change are you trying to make? Now, it's way more subtle than you think. Companies that are pretty trivial say the change they're seeking to make is to turn non-customers into customers, and to turn people who pay them $5 into people who paid them $10. But organizations that matter have a bigger thing going on. So Harley Davidson, what do? Harley Davidson turns disrespected outsiders into respected insiders. Not everybody, just a group of people that wanted to belong. That is what Harley Davidson does for a living. They don't make motorcycles. That's a side effect. What they do, their change that they make is to have that emotional shift. Apple Computer, the most valuable company in the world. What change did Steve Jobs figure out? The change was, we're going to give people better taste about digital interactions. Because once you have better taste, you will not be satisfied with 3 fonts. Once you have better taste, you will want to make sure that your headphones look and feel a certain way. They're losing some of that thread because now they're just a luxury brand. But the point is that if you can be clear about the change you seek to make for the people you're serving in whichever community you seek to serve, your meetings get a lot better because you don't have to keep going back to the starting point. You can say, look, if we're going to be held accountable for this group of people having this sort of change, then what we need to do next is clear. What we need to do next is obvious. Liz?
Yeah, no, I think I'm totally in agreement with you on that. I think also in the what, in sort of like what is the problem, we need to make sure that we are ceding power and allowing the people who are most impacted by that problem to actually define it. So I just wanted to make sure, right, that we're kind of thinking about how our power is yeah.
So one of the things that we know is that one of the best ways to raise your status is to cede power. That early in your career, you might believe the opposite is true, that taking power raises your status. But if you think about the people who have the most power in almost every culture, they're the ones who are willing to hold the door open for other people. They're the ones who are willing to leave space for other people because they can, quote, afford to. And so your status goes up when you listen to the people you are seeking to serve.
Yeah.
Okay. Affiliation. This was one that you and I talked about earlier. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think, so when I'm invited to give a presentation to usually a large corporation, I've started doing this thing because it was something that I had sort of experienced for myself. And to be clear, I approach my work from an autoethnographic perspective. So whenever I feel that tinge of, okay, like this doesn't feel so good, like Seth will attest, like I lean into that. And so I've been invited on occasion to give these presentations to large corporations. And what I've started doing at the beginning is I will speak directly to the disabled employees of that company, because what I say to them is I know that it can be painful for you to see someone like me get a platform when you're trying so hard to do this work internally. And what I want to assure you is I'm not here to undermine you. I'm actually here to reach you, and I want to meet you. And what that has actually allowed to happen is I've started making friendships with people in different corporations who are feeling more and more isolated. There's this interesting dynamic that happens, and this has been a lot of my work, which is that when a corporation partners with, like, you could say like any disability organization, what happens is that disability organization will validate the work of that corporation. And because of that, the corporation is less incentivized to listen to the needs of its disabled employees, right? And so, right, as these disability organizations, which claim to be operating in community, right, and use that sense of community to partner with these corporations, right, at the same time that they're claiming community, there is a whole other group that is becoming more isolated. And so, for me, the question is how is it that, we can, I'm trying to figure out the best way to explain this. Sorry about that. My interest has stopped being in working simply with someone with an identity. So I no longer look to work simply with disabled people. What I look for is what is somebody's orientation, right? And what that means is if you are someone who is politically oriented, and Seth, you're going to have to translate this for me. If you're someone who is politically oriented, what this means is that you understand yourself to be communicating up a hierarchical chain of command. If you're someone that's corporate oriented, you're going to believe yourself to be answering up a hierarchical chain of command. And that answering up a hierarchical chain of command is something that is really respected, right? People that are institutionally affiliated are really respected. And what that leads to is people who, I'm not making sense. Will you pick up from this, Seth? I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry. The work that you do of shining a light into corners where light has traditionally not been shined by privileged folks is really difficult. And you do it so beautifully. One of the things about affiliation, and I'm going to come around to where you just left off, affiliation is the other half of culture along with status. Affiliation is what are things like around here? Affiliation is you don't wear a clown suit to a funeral. because it's inappropriate. Why is it inappropriate? Because people like us don't do things like that. And this idea of people like us do things like this is one of the highest leverage things you have as an individual in your organization. You may not have power and authority, but you have the ability to start establishing a culture. And one of the things that Liz is getting at is, if you go to work every day saying, what do you want me to do? And I'm just doing my job, then you are playing in a corporate role. But if you want to lead, you don't have to have a job title. You are simply a maker of culture. And, you know, we've been ranting here for 25 minutes, and I have failed to thank Beth and Chris. For them to show up with the passion and the talent they do repeatedly, well, that's another way of establishing culture. It's another way of saying, yeah, this is part of what it means to be here, to be around here. And you have way more leverage, each person watching this, to change the culture than you know. And as we begin to change the culture through affiliation, through, do you want to be part of this circle? It will then leak into the way the corporation thinks and acts. Did I do that justice, Liz?
Yeah, you did a good job.
Okay, because you'll correct me, I know. Okay, we're working our way toward our Q&A, but now we've got authority, which I already touched on. But Liz, you want to add anything to my rants about authority?
Yeah, I had a question for you. Like, what is the difference between author and authority?
Authors, as someone who has touched 150 books, are rarely granted authority. And pretty much we like that, in the sense that our editor gets to decide stuff and our publisher gets to decide stuff. And if the book doesn't sell, the book doesn't sell. That the very act of being an author is very close to what many of the people on this call have, which is the ability to speak up, but not the ability to dictate what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
There are very, very few people who have power and authority who also write books, because power and authority means you can just tell people what to do.
Yeah.
Authors have to persuade people what to do.
Yeah, I think like my feeling has been, so I don't know if you remember, but there was this show that it got canceled. It was called The Activist, and it was widely panned because they were essentially pitting activists up against each other. And afterward, there was this person on Twitter, his name is Adam H. Johnson, and he wrote this tweet that has stuck with me for the longest time. And in it, what he describes is something called authorless problems. And what he said with authorless problems is there's poverty, but there's no institutions or persons making anyone poor. There's hunger, but nobody is hoarding the resources and food. It's not activism against anything in particular. It's just abstract social problems with no authors. And this has really struck me for the longest time, because in my purview as someone who leans into and honors the friction of disability, the people who have been assigned these roles of being the authority, they tend to, in my purview, they tend to also be people that aren't willing to author problems, right? And I'm trying to understand what this disconnect is. And I think a lot of it comes to the ways in which we are taught to practice our work, right? If you are designing for, right? Because we're taught in design schools to design for disability, right? You're doing so without authoring a problem. But my interest is in designing against, right? And creating that friction and leaning into those moments where things feel a little bit off. And designing against actually requires you author a problem. And so I think for me, what a shift that I would like to see is a greater willingness of people leveraging their authority, however it may be, so that they can author problems.
Yeah. There's a lot of depth in what you're talking about. Let me just dance around one of the edges, which is, we were talking before this started about composting tea bags. And it is British Petroleum's goal for each of us to feel like we are personally responsible for our climate emergency. And if you could just lower your carbon footprint, everything would be fine.
Yeah.
But we have a systemic problem. and systemic problems need systemic solutions. And in this case, feeling like you have an authorship role is essential. It's not clear to me that anybody on this call is single-handedly going to fix any of the problems that we are talking about. What we are talking about instead is, how do we change the culture? And the way we change the culture is one person at a time, saying people like us do things like this. And that is why conferences like this matter so much. It's why coming together to coordinate, to understand how we're going to talk about things, that is how things will change, because status has no chance against culture. Culture is the way we do things around here, which leads to one of my favorites, which is tension. This one makes people so uncomfortable when I talk about it, and it makes people so uncomfortable when Liz creates it, and it's really important. If you want to shoot a rubber band across the room, the only way to do it is to pull it backwards. And tension is what we always feel just before change happens. And people who have signed up to do a job that involves change have to embrace the fact that tension will be involved. So that means there's a deadline. If you don't buy your tickets by noon, you can't get one. It means that this thing is going to happen at this moment. Sorry if you're feeling left behind. It means that I'm going to bring something to the table that maybe not everyone likes the first day. Tension is created on the way to causing change to happen. That doesn't mean you have a license to disrespect the very institution that you need to dance with. What it means is that we can intentionally say, sorry, that's the local volunteer fire department, that we can intentionally say, I'm going to build a little tension right here so that I can get attention, it's a pun, and then help people move to the next level. Liz, you want to chime in? And then I think I got like 2 or 3 more words left.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking about, I remember, and this is back in thinking about the disability dongle. I remember a few years ago, there was this headline that said that there was a group of researchers that were using Google Glass to teach autistic children how to make eye contact. And this describes the ways in which disability dongles are created to ease tension, but they ease the wrong tension, right? Because autistic children don't want to learn. It is harmful to autistic children to learn how to make eye contact. Autistic children making eye contact only makes the non-disabled people around them more comfortable, right? And so this is one of the things that leads to a disability dongle. What are we assuming is attention, and is it actually that? And I think that's why I like to honor the friction of disability. The reason that I created the disability dongle hashtag was I was essentially using a viral meme culture approach to critique objects that were essentially created to go viral, right? And so it isn't bad to lean into tension. I think the desire to ease tension is the thing that can actually cause a lot of harm.
Yes, and friction is a cool word. If you look up trying to run across ice in wet, bare feet, you'll discover you can't. Because if you don't have any friction, nothing is going to move forward. And that leads to this idea of voices. Which voices are you listening to, and which voices are you amplifying? And I think that, watching Liz's selfless work over the years has been extraordinary, because she is very intentional about this idea of voices.
Yeah. I don't know if I have more to add to voices. I think that's really what all of this is about, is when is it that we're in a position where we might need to cede power? When is it that we can amplify another perspective? And what is the friction that we can create that will allow us to better do that?
Yes, bingo. Okay, this is the last one I want to talk about, which is there is a belief in many industries that perfect is the goal and that perfect is attainable. And their definition is the way we did it yesterday, that it is perfect to make a Big Mac just this way. It meets spec. And the thing about perfect is it means you are blameless. It means you are invisible. It means you have no responsibility, because there was a spec You had a job and you did it. And what I can tell you is, in 60 years of looking around our culture, I can't recall very many times I have seen perfect. Even the perfect kilogram, which is stored in a vault in Paris, doesn't weigh exactly a kilogram. We could make it a little bit better. And so it's a mistake to go into work today to say, I'm going to defend the perfect that we built yesterday. That our only job is to make things better. And that means we have to acknowledge, we begin by saying, and what we have now is not perfect. And that's okay. In fact, if you're not willing to say that, you're not paying attention. And for the last word before our Q&A, I'm going to let my friend Liz finish this riff.
Okay. So, I think a lot of what I think about is, what does a phrase or a term that we use communicate? And two of those terms, well, the first one is 100% accessible. So, when you're actually working on accessibility, you'll oftentimes hear that promise. And what that promise often actually conveys to me, a disabled person who is engaged in this work, what 100% accessible says to me is that a disabled person is probably not leading on this project, right? Because a disabled person that has this lived experience wouldn't make that claim. And so, right, like this idea of achieving some level of perfection when that's not actually our lived experience, I think we need to shift that. I also want to talk about this notion of design for all, because there's this embedded notion in it that, right, if you design for a single person, everyone can benefit. And it's been one of the greatest sources of frustration in my work, because what I have found is that when you say design for an individual and then everyone benefits, right, you're actually doing something there, which is you're saying that the person that you're designing for isn't actually going to benefit. It shows that the person that you're hoping to impress, right, is everyone else. But if that's not the whole story, right? If you let the story play out, what happens is a person will be designed for, right? And then we say everyone will benefit. The way this happens in an organization is there's usually someone who's a mid-level manager, and what they will do is they will convince the powers that be that if you do this, right, we're going to make a lot of money. So they create the thing, they say everyone will benefit, and then once it goes into practice, they've got to figure out, okay, how are we actually going to make everyone benefit? And so after it has been announced as this product that was created for a disabled person, they slowly start to erase the disabled person from the marketing material so as not to stigmatize it from everybody else. And what this has actually led to is products are increasingly becoming made inaccessible to disabled people through this process. My partner, Alex Hagard, often cites the curb cut, which once we understood that people that use strollers, people that use skateboards will also use a curb cut, curb cuts stopped being made to the specifications that were needed for wheelchair users. And so over time, they've actually become less accessible. And so I think we need to get away from these statements that imbue perfection, 100% accessible or designed for all, because it's actually leading to things becoming less accessible for the people who need it the most.
So there's a lot to think about. I know that every time I went through this, it gave me a lot to think about. And again, so before I hand this back to Laura to curate our Q&A, I want to thank Chris and Beth again, but I also want to thank you, because none of this moves forward if you don't establish the culture. So thank you for checking this out. Laura, what do you want to talk about?
Well, first of all, great, amazing job. Really loved the discussion between you and Liz. You guys have such great chemistry, and I love the ideas that you both were exploring so far. We have a lot of really great questions. The first one I want to hone in on here is saying, what are your thoughts on the emotional labor and unpaid work in individual activism when leaders and managers continue to only be superficially accountable?
I'll dive in because I've written about this. Ariel Hochschild wrote about emotional labor a really long time ago in the 60s. There are lots of ways to interpret the phrase emotional labor. She originally wrote about it with flight attendants who were forced to smile and pretend to be cheerful even when they didn't feel like it. And traditionally, it has been something that people who were under-respected were expected to do. I have spun it around in a couple of my books and talked about the fact that it's actually an opportunity to, instead of saying I do physical labor, be able to show up and say, my job at work is to be a professional and do things I don't feel like because the work matters enough. That my job, I am super lucky to be trusted enough to do this kind of work, is to lean in with my emotions, doing labor designed to help other people move forward. And there are there's a whole spectrum of ways that you can interpret it. But what I would get at is the question sort of behind the question, which is, my boss won't let me. I really want to do these things right, but my boss won't let me. I want to be held accountable, but my boss doesn't want to be held accountable. And the thing is, this gets right back to culture and affiliation and status, because your boss has a whole narrative inside their head and a whole bunch of fears and challenges that they are dancing with. And we're not the only good people in the room. The challenge is to establish a culture where somebody who ordinarily wouldn't do emotional labor in this area will do emotional labor in this area because they need to for affiliation and status purposes. And that isn't, quote, as authentic as we might like, but it causes the same output. And eventually people begin to act internally to match the way they're acting externally. So establishing the conditions for the kind of culture change we're talking about is in everyone's power. And that is where we begin, not by waiting for someone to give us the authority, but instead establishing what people like us do so that it spreads. And that's not happening fast enough, but it's happening faster than it's ever happened in human history.
Yeah. I would add to that your question is very much why I created the A12Y hashtag. And I hope you will use it because, I think we think of ally of the sort of the technical expertise of accessibility work as being the only technical expertise. But I think that there is another technical expertise, and that is the navigating of institutional barriers. And while I can't respond to your experience directly because I don't know what it is, I'm just going to sort of cite an example that kind of comes front of mind because, right, so through this process of my meeting people in different corporations, what I have created a small group. It's called Disabled Troublemakers. And it's been people that have sort of been branded troublemakers in their company. We just come together, we email. If you kind of perceive yourself as being such a disabled troublemaker, feel free to reach out. I'm easy to find, but right, we work together and we figure out what are the institutional barriers. They're oftentimes shared. And what are people in different organizations doing? What's working and what's not. And so one of those institutional barriers is there's this thing that happens at an ally work, which is you find somebody that might be like low-level mid-manager, my kind of people, and they will have an idea and they will start to pursue that idea. And they'll gain a little traction and that idea will become a thing. And that thing will grow within the company, right? And it'll become such a thing that it will gain the attention of the powers that be. And it's like, well, like, what do the powers that be do, right? Because they haven't been invested in this process up until now, and they're not at fault for it. It's just the logical way that this plays out. Well, what the powers that be do is they decide, oh, this is a thing that does good. I am going to announce it, right? And then the powers that be will announce that thing that you've been working your ass off for, right, to great fanfare. And it's exciting when it happens. But then what happens afterward, right? Because we always get to the announcement. We never think about what happens afterward. Well, what happens afterward? Well, afterward, the powers that be realize like, oh, this thing that sounds good, that I can't announce it again, right? And they don't understand the substance of the thing. They think the substance of the thing was in the announcement, right? So they don't really have more use for it. And then suddenly all those resources you've accrued, right? All that traction that you've gained, suddenly it starts to fall away. And that project that you had built into a thing that became announced to great fanfare, suddenly it dissolves like sand through the fingertips, right? And so one of the ways in which Alex and I, advocate for people to navigate institutional barriers is we say resist the announcement, right? Resist the empty gesture. And so whatever it is that you're navigating, I just want to assure you, you're not alone in that. There are others. And I think it's really about bringing those others together in safe spaces so we can start to figure out like, okay, how do we start to address these things meaningfully together?
Amazing. Love the discussion. Love the answers. I think you guys really, really nailed that question. So thank you for that. Got a follow-up question here. So some of the aspects discussed here continue to be demands by senior leaders for focus and funding. So are there ideas to continue to motivate those beaten back by this wall?
Can you ask that again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so some aspects discussed here continue to be demands by senior leaders for focus and funding. Yeah. Ideas to help continue to motivate those that are beaten back by this blocker or this wall.
Yeah. One of the things about navigating internal conversation is who gets a voice at the table. And one of the things that I've encouraged in lots of spaces, including this one, is to record some Zoom calls, take out your camera, and make a supercut. Make a supercut 1-2 minutes long of actual customers looking right at the camera and telling their actual truth of what it is like to deal with your organization. And it will speak for itself, and start to share that. You don't have to be the only person at the table who is speaking up. That, remember, the goal at the institution is probably not, how do I personally make more profit for this company? The goal is probably, how do I make my boss happy? And one of the ways to make the boss happy is to diminish the number of people who are really frustrated at how broken things are. And if you can bring that broken into the room, people will work to make the broken go away. But Liz has way more experience at this than I do.
Yeah, for some reason, I'm just having a hard time understanding capturing the question.
The way I interpreted it is, how do we make sure that our bosses are giving us the resources that are necessary to do this work?
You know, yeah, I mean, that's the hard part. And I think that's why we need to start to come together, because I don't necessarily know that anybody is getting the resources that we need to do this work. You know, and I don't want to sort of call out companies. I mean, it's something I've been tracking. When resources do seem to accrue, they also seem to go away. And so I think for me, it's a question of how do we make the resources more sustainable and allow them to build? I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer for that question right now.
That's a great answer. I think together we change the culture way better than separately.
Thanks so much. I think we have time for one more question here.
Yeah.
So you both have been talking a lot about culture change and how we can start that on an individual level and grow that. But sometimes I think as accessibility folks, it's hard to figure out a best way that we can market that. So if you have any good marketing tips, ways that people can become better advocates, if that's something that they're not used to, I think that would be really helpful for promoting that change that we've been discussing. So if you have any tips or pointers for folks, that would be really helpful and a great note to end on.
You want the last word or the first word, Liz?
I'll take the last word.
You're here because you cared. You didn't take this job because you had a shot at Goldman Sachs to make $1 billion. That wasn't on your agenda. You want to do the right thing in the right way. And now the organization doesn't get the joke yet. And they're looking to you to say, what would it mean for you to have A12Y and to spread that idea? Committing to that will help you see how others before you in different spaces have done the same thing. So I can't give you 2 little bullet points about what you should do tomorrow. What I'm saying is this is the hard part. The hard part is leaning into this and saying, this isn't going to be what I want to do all day, but this is what it's going to take to get my job to the next level.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we do is spend a lot of, in ally work, we spend a lot of time addressing the fears of the powers that be without sort of acknowledging our own fears. And it seems to me that and this is really one of the goals with A12Y is how is it that we can start to get people to try different things and maybe kind of get out of line a little bit, and be a little bit bolder in this work, because I think this compliance orientation has rubbed off on us. And I think we lack a courage to do the big, scary thing, right? To author the problems. And so, I would encourage you to kind of do that analytical work, really understand, right? Who am I trying to impress with this work? What are my intentions? And then figure out, is that aligning with the practice that I have? And so, my plea to you is figure out, okay, how can I incorporate A12Y accountability into my A11Y accessibility work? Thank you.
Beautiful. Well said.
Amazing. So we're at the end of our time. I know we could have probably done this for at least another hour, but I just want to thank you. Liz and Seth did an amazing job. This has been one of my favorite sessions so far. So just want to thank you again. And I hope everybody has a great rest of their AXCON for the day.
Go make a ruckus, everybody.